For Fred McGriff, the Hall of Fame wait is finally over. The five-time All-Star, three-time Silver Slugger Award winner, and 1995 World Series champion as a member of the Atlanta Braves was unanimously elected by the 16-member era committee Sunday. And for a celebratory BPTV, Cory McCartney, along with Grant McAuley, as always. And Grant, we wondered how this 16-member committee would view the 8 players in front of them, and it speaks volumes that every one of them got behind Fred McGriff.
Yeah, it really does. I think it tells you about the maybe quiet excellence for Fred McGriff. I always felt like while he was one of baseball's better sluggers for a decade and a half, he always seemed to kind of be in the background, just operating with this very steady 30 home runs, 100 runs batted in, and a whole lot of other things that he gave you as an offensive player. He wasn't just a slugger. He was a pretty great all-around hitter, but just not the shiniest toy, perhaps, for people to look at throughout the decade of the 90s and early 2000s. But I am glad that he was finally rewarded for what was an excellent career that spanned nearly 2 decades, and one that, like many Hall of Famers, and probably many players in general, has some really fascinating aspects to how exactly he, A, made it to the major leagues, and B, was able to become a very key piece for a number of different clubs throughout the course of 19 seasons.
Yeah, outside of McGriff, Don Mattingly had 8 votes, 4 shy of the 12 needed for election. Curt Schilling had 7. And on the flip side of the high the Braves country is feeling right now for McGriff, Dale Murphy had 6. And it's Grant, obviously the wait continues for him.
Yeah, it does. And I hate to mute the celebration for Fred McGriff because this was, to me, righting a wrong from the baseball writer side of things. And, you know, we're not going to waste all of our time talking about the different problems that the ballot has had over the last decade and a half. Not just the candidates, but the limitations of 10 and all the other things that have gone into it. But Fred McGriff, who had never received more than 39% of the writers' vote, was finally able to get into Cooperstown. Meanwhile, for Dale Murphy, I think he was very much in the same side of a lot of crowded ballots. And then as things went on, he just wasn't able to garner the necessary support to get him over the hump from the writers' side. 6 is an improvement over the last time he was on the ballot when they did not release his vote total. But I still feel like, and will continue to, and if you follow me on Twitter, I'm sure you noticed in the last 72 hours, Dale Murphy is a very viable candidate for the Hall of Fame. This committee will not meet again to vote on players until 2025. Hopefully Dale Murphy will get another opportunity, and the voters may look on him in the same way that they looked on Fred McGriff, because I feel like every time you strengthen your case, it is at least a step forward.
Yeah, Murphy's 3rd time on the era committee ballot. Obviously, you have to think someday that call is going to come for him, but the attention now deservedly on Fred McGriff, who adds to the Hall of Famers for the Braves run of 14 straight division titles. Now, Bobby Cox, Tom Glavine, Chipper Jones, Greg Maddux, John Schuerholz, John Smoltz, and Fred McGriff, the crime dog, 2,490 hits, 493 homers, 1,550 RBIs, 1,305 walks. 13 players, Grant, had those numbers by the time Fred McGriff retired in 2004. There's only one of them who's now not in the Hall of Fame, and that's Barry Bonds. I mean, McGriff, simply a model of consistency, 10 seasons with 30 or more homers, including 7 straight. The only players who had more RBI or extra base hits than him from 88 to 2002 were Bonds and Rafael Palmeiro, who, of course, had the dark cloud of PEDs hanging over both of them. I bring that up, Grant, because I think in a roundabout way, it's easy to understand when so many unsavory names were on this ballot, it almost felt like the spotlight burned that much brighter on McGriff in comparison to the likes of Bonds, Clemens, and Rafael Palmeiro.
I certainly think it did. And the fact that McGriff had longevity on his side, that's something that for Dale Murphy and for Don Mattingly, their careers ended, I think, a little bit sooner than anybody would have thought, and certainly sooner than either man would have liked, just based on injuries that both of them suffered. For Mattingly, the back. For Murphy, as we've chronicled, it was the knees that slowed him down and eventually led to an early departure early into his career. So when you put guys like that up against some of the more questionable characters of the last two or three decades, I mean, you can make the case Bonds and Clemens were Hall of Famers before the questions about PEDs came around the turn of the millennium. I don't know that you can make the same argument for Rafael Palmeiro, but man, those numbers are crazy. But, all of these guys appear to have made different choices, and those choices have taken them along different paths, which come with a lot of questions and a lot of consternation. And one thing I think we can take away from the voting of the contemporary era committee is that if you thought it was tough for the suspected PED users to get in on the baseball writer side of things, it looks like it's going to be even tougher for them to get in with a jury of their peers, like this committee, which included, I believe, 8 current Hall of Famers, or at least 7. Chipper Jones had to bow out after getting sick.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because while I do think this was a bit of a course correction for what the writers didn't get right, uh, pun intended there, I guess, with Fred McGriff. I mean,
Yeah.
I think with Bonds and Clemens, the fact that they received fewer than 4 votes. I mean, the last time they were on the writers' ballot, Bonds was at 66%, Clemens was at 65.2%. And so now you've got them in a group of their peers who gave them even less support. So it almost makes it feel like they're even that further away from induction. Maybe they're looking at this from the end of saying, okay, you just fell off the writers' ballot. Let's let this breathe for a little bit. But you can also look at it from the end where these guys are saying, it's going to be a while before you guys wind up in Cooperstown.
And these guys just came off the writers' ballot and were thrown immediately onto this first contemporary era committee. And these committees, I'm sure if you're following the Hall of Fame, if you're still with us at this point, they keep getting revamped over the course of years. And maybe that'll happen again. I don't know. But they were put right back into the voting spotlight. And it did not necessarily take the results and any momentum that they had from the writers' ballot and move it right on over to this eras committee, as they received, as you mentioned, less than 4 votes. Now, the voters were limited to voting for only 3 candidates. So you do the simple math, 16 panelists, 3 votes, that's 48 votes. 16 of those went to Fred McGriff. That was going to make it, I think, mathematically speaking, markedly harder for anybody else to gain election, though you thought maybe that second candidate, the right second candidate, I was hoping the one who wore number 3 for the Braves would be a guy who would get some positive momentum and a fresh look on his case, as you brought up, in the light of the other characters who were on this ballot. Questionable in a lot of different ways. And, we'll wait and see what ultimately ends up happening. But for Bonds and Clemens, to make a long story short, now they're not going to get every year consideration. It's going to be every 3 years as the current system is set up.
Well, this much we know. The Braves just bought some more real estate in Cooperstown with McGriff. Again, a unanimous selection by the era committees. Make sure you stick with us all winter long here on BPTV. So subscribe, turn notifications, and help spread the word. Also, don't forget to catch us on From the Diamond, available wherever you find your podcast. Until next time, I'm Cory McCartney. He's Grant McAuley, and we'll see you soon, Braves country.